Walter Price was 42 years old, and until the night he came home to a half-empty bedroom, he believed his marriage was simply going through a rough season. He drove a 7-year-old pickup. He wore Carhartt to work. He carried a thermos and clocked onto job sites before sunrise, and his wife Diana had quietly decided that made him small. For 8 months, while Walter fixed structural problems other engineers couldn't solve and managed a private family trust worth 8 figures, Diana was planning her exit. The night she finally sat across from him at their kitchen table, composed and certain, she told him she deserved better, that she'd found it, that the man she was leaving him for was, in her exact words, an upgrade. She had no idea she was leaving the wealthiest private black landowner in the city. No idea that the man she'd dismissed as ordinary had never once needed to announce what he owned. Walter didn't argue, didn't beg. He walked to his late father's study, opened a drawer he hadn't touched in 3 years, and looked at a number that would have ended the conversation before it started. Then he closed the folder, and he picked up the phone. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The alarm went off at 4:47 a.m. Walter Price didn't groan, didn't slap it. He simply opened his eyes, lay still for exactly 3 seconds, and got up. That was how he did everything. The kitchen was dark and quiet. He filled his thermos with coffee, black, no sugar, and screwed the lid tight. He pulled on his Carhartt jacket, checked the inside pocket for his site notebook, and walked out to the driveway. The pickup sat under the orange glow of the streetlight. A 2017 Ford F-150, gray, with a long scratch along the passenger door from a rebar accident 3 years ago that he'd never bothered to fix. He drove through the city while it was still sleeping. The Delmar Road project was a 6-story mixed-use building going up on the east side of downtown. Walter had been the site engineer for 4 months. By the time he pulled through the chain-link gate, the sky was still the color of dark water. 2 of his crew members were already there, sitting on a tailgate with their own coffees. They straightened when they saw his headlights. "Morning, Mr. Price." "Morning." He nodded at both of them. "Give me 10 minutes, then let's walk the East Foundation." He didn't wait for a response. Inside the site trailer, Walter spread the structural drawings across the folding table and studied them under the fluorescent light. He moved his fingers slowly along the load-bearing column placements on the 3rd-floor plan. Something had been bothering him about section C7 for 2 days, a quiet itch in the back of his mind that he couldn't shake. He found it at 7:14 a.m. 3 of the junior engineers arrived at 7:30. They were good kids, sharp, eager, fresh from their licensing exams. When Walter showed them what he'd found, the room got quiet. The anchor bolt spacing on 2 of the east columns had been spec'd at an interval that didn't account for the lateral load shift created by the building's asymmetrical roofline. It wasn't dramatic. No one would have seen it from the outside. But under the right wind conditions over enough years, it would have become a very expensive problem. Possibly worse than expensive. "How'd you catch that?" one of them asked. Walter capped his pen. "Because I looked at it long enough." He sent the correction to the project architect before 8 a.m. No announcement, no speech. He poured more coffee from his thermos and went back outside to walk the site. That was how he did everything. He was home by 6:30 that evening. Diana was in the kitchen when he came through the door. She was still in her work clothes, a gray blazer, silver earrings, standing at the counter scrolling through her phone. She looked up. "There's pasta on the stove," she said. "Thanks." He set his thermos in the sink. Dinner was what dinner had been for a while. Quiet in the wrong way. Diana talked about her day, a budget meeting, a difficult department head, a colleague who had just been offered a position at a private hospital group. Walter listened. He asked a question where it seemed like a question belonged. Then she mentioned the gala. "Apparently, Brendan Fields hosted some charity event last weekend," she said, twirling her fork. Downtown, rooftop venue. Half the administrative team went. She paused. Sarah wouldn't stop talking about it today. The food, the views. Another pause. Smaller. It sounds like it was something. Walter looked at his plate. Sounds like it. You could have been running projects like that, Diana said. Not with anger. With something quieter and harder than anger. If you'd pushed for project director when Morrison left, you had the experience. I like the work I do, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to her phone. He washed the dishes after dinner. He dried them and put them away in the right places. He thought, not for the first time, about something his father had told him when he was 19 years old. Standing in the study of the family property, watching the old man review a set of financial documents without any urgency at all. Walter, a man who announces his wealth, invites people to want it more than they want him. The right woman won't need to know about the money. She'll see the man first. He had believed that then. He still did. Mostly. He dried his hands and went upstairs. He noticed it in the bedroom. The top drawer of Diana's nightstand was open. Empty. He turned and looked at the dresser. Her jewelry box was gone. The small leather one her mother had given her. The one that held everything that mattered. He opened the closet. Her travel bag was missing. He walked to the filing cabinet they kept in the corner and pulled open the second drawer. Her passport. Her birth certificate. Her social security card. Gone. Walter stood in the quiet bedroom for a long moment. His face was still. Then he walked back downstairs. Diana was sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded, waiting. Diana spoke first. "I've been thinking about how to say this for a long time," she said. "I want to say it right." Walter sat down across from her. He set his hands flat on the table. She looked composed. That was the word for it. Like she had rehearsed this in the car, in the mirror, maybe in Brendan Fields' penthouse while Walter was walking job sites in the dark. Her silver earrings caught the kitchen light. Her blazer was still buttoned. "I have been unhappy for years, Walter." She said it the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis. Careful. Definite. Already past the part where it hurts. Not because of anything dramatic. Not because you did something terrible. Just this. She gestured at the kitchen. At the table. At him, maybe. At all of it. "This isn't the life I'm supposed to be living." Walter said nothing. "I've tried," she continued. "I want you to know that I genuinely tried. But I kept waiting for things to grow. And they didn't. And I think," she paused to choose the word, "I think I deserve a life with dimension." The refrigerator hummed in the silence. "I've been seeing someone," she said, "for about 8 months. His name is Brendan Fields." The name sat on the table between them like something dropped from a height. Walter looked at her. His expression did not change. His hands did not move. "He gives me the life I should have had." She said it without flinching, without cruelty, but without apology either. The way a person states a fact they have accepted so completely, it no longer feels unkind to say out loud. "He's an upgrade, Walter. I know how that sounds, but it's honest. And I think you deserve honesty." An upgrade. She said it the way people say it is what it is. Like it was simple. Like it was just math. And she had already done the math. And the answer was clean. "I've already spoken to an attorney," she said. "I'm filing for divorce. I'm not here to argue about it. I wanted to tell you myself. Face to face. I thought you were owed that much." She folded her hands again and waited. Walter sat with it for a moment. The kitchen was warm. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street, its headlights sweeping across the window and disappearing. Then he asked his question. "Did you tell him about the properties?" Diana blinked. It was the first time her composure moved, just slightly. A small shift behind her eyes. Not guilt, not fear. Confusion. "What properties?" she said. Walter looked at her for one long, still moment. Then he stood up from the table. He didn't explain. He didn't raise his voice. He picked up his thermos from the sink, set it on the counter with a quiet click, and walked out of the kitchen. His father's study was at the end of the hall, a narrow room with dark wood paneling, built-in bookshelves, and a heavy mahogany desk that had been in the Price family longer than Walter had been alive. Diana had looked in once, years ago, and called it gloomy. After that, she never went back. She had no interest in old furniture and old books, and so she had no interest in the room. And so she had never understood what the room actually was. Walter turned on the desk lamp. Warm light filled the small space. He sat down in his father's chair, worn leather, the color of dark coffee, and opened the bottom drawer. It moved smoothly. He had kept the runners oiled even when he didn't open it. Some habits his father had given him were like that. Maintenance for its own sake. Care applied to things even when no one was watching. Inside the drawer was a single manila folder, no label. Just a small strip of tape along the top where his father had written a date in black ink. The date of the last formal appraisal. Walter placed the folder on the desk. He opened it slowly. The documents inside were organized the way his father had organized everything. Clean, precise, in a specific order that told the full story if you read it correctly. Property schedules, portfolio summaries, equity positions, fund valuations. And at the back, behind all of it, the most recent independent appraisal of the Price Family Holdings Trust. Walter turned to the last page. The number at the bottom was 8 figures. He looked at it for a long time. Not with excitement, not with grief. With the quiet, steady attention of a man who had just confirmed something he already knew but needed to sit with again. He closed the folder. He placed it back in the drawer. He reached for his phone and dialed the one number he didn't need to look up. It rang twice. Walter. His mother's voice was calm. She answered the phone the same way she answered everything, like she had been expecting it. "Hey, Mama," he said. "You got time to talk?" Ruth Price lived 20 minutes from Walter's house, in a neighborhood that had not changed much in 40 years. The streets were lined with old oak trees, their roots slowly winning the long war against the sidewalks. The houses were well kept, not flashy, just solid. The kind of neighborhood where people mowed their own lawns and knew their neighbors' names. Walter parked in the driveway at 9:47 p.m. The porch light was already on. He walked up the front steps, and before he could lift his hand to knock, the door opened. Ruth stood in the doorway in her housecoat and slippers, her silver hair pinned back, her expression exactly the same as it had been every time he had come to her with something heavy. Not alarmed, not soft, just present, steady in the way that old trees are steady. Not because nothing has ever hit them, but because everything has, and they are still standing. "Come in," she said. "Coffee's on." They sat at her kitchen table the same way they always had. Walter with both hands wrapped around his mug. Ruth with hers set to the side, untouched, cooling slowly while she listened. He told her everything, from the beginning. Diana at the table, composed and rehearsed. The word she used, upgrade, and the flat, certain way she said it. The 8 months, Brendan Fields, the attorney, the divorce papers already in motion, and then the question Walter had asked, and the look on Diana's face when she heard it. Ruth listened to all of it, without a word. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet. The old clock above the stove ticked steadily. Ruth picked up her mug, took a slow sip, and set it back down. "She never asked," Ruth said. "Not once in 12 years. "No," Walter said. Ruth nodded, like that single fact had confirmed something she had carried for a long time. "She never asked because she decided who you were before she knew you." She said it without anger, without satisfaction, even. Just the plain weight of a true thing being spoken out loud. She looked at the truck. She looked at the work boots. She looked at the way you talked at dinner parties, or didn't talk, and she built a picture. And then she lived inside that picture for 12 years, and never once thought to check if it was real. Walter turned his mug slowly in his hands. "Your father always said the right woman wouldn't need to know," Ruth continued, "and he was right about most things. But what he meant was, the right woman would be curious enough to find out." She paused. "Diana was never curious about you, Walter. That's the part that should have told you something a long time ago." Walter didn't argue with that. He just sat with it. Ruth folded her hands on the table and looked at her son directly. "Let me tell you what she walked away from, since she never bothered to ask." What followed was not a speech. Ruth was not a woman given to speeches. It was more like a quiet accounting, the kind delivered by someone who had helped build the thing being counted and knew every piece of it by heart. The Price Family Holdings Trust, she explained, currently held 11 commercial properties across the city. 4 of them were in the Meridian Corridor, the stretch of offices and medical buildings on the east side, where 3 of the city's largest hospital systems leased their administrative space. One of those tenants, Ruth said, looking at Walter steadily, was the hospital where Diana worked. The administrative offices where Diana sat at her desk every day, where she had risen through the ranks, where she had built the career she was so proud of, those offices were in a building that belonged to the Price family. She had been working in Walter's building for 6 years without knowing it. Beyond that, the trust held 2 industrial warehouses in the district on the city's northwest edge, a controlling stake in a regional development fund that operated across 4 counties, and a portfolio of smaller equity positions that, taken together, had been compounding quietly for 2 decades. The most recent appraisal, Ruth said, put the total value of the trust's assets at just over $40 million. Walter was the single wealthiest private black landowner in the city. He had been for years. "She spent 12 years in your house," Ruth said, "and never once asked what your father left you. Not when he died. Not after the funeral. Not a single time." She picked up her mug again. "That's not something that happens by accident. That's a woman who had already decided the answer didn't matter." Walter was quiet for a long moment. The clock above the stove kept ticking. "I'm going to let her finish celebrating," he finally said, "before I do anything." Ruth looked at him. Something moved behind her eyes. Not surprise. Recognition. "Then move carefully," she said, "and move completely." Walter nodded. He finished his coffee. He helped Ruth rinse the mugs. He kissed her on the cheek at the door, walked back down the porch steps, and got in his truck. He drove home through the quiet dark of the city, his city, and he didn't turn the radio on. Walter was up before the alarm. He hadn't slept much. Not because he was broken up about it. The grief was there, somewhere underneath everything, but it was quiet, and he knew how to let quiet things stay quiet. He lay in the dark for a while, staring at the ceiling, thinking the way his father had taught him to think. Not about feelings, about sequence. About what came first, and what came after, and what had to be in place before anything else could move. By 5:30 he was dressed. By 5:45 he had his thermos and his phone. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Diana had been sitting 12 hours ago, and he dialed Adrienne Cole. She picked up on the second ring. "Walter," she said. No surprise in her voice, just readiness. "I need you at the estate this morning," he said. "Early as you can." "I'll be there at 8, she said. She was there at 7:50. The Price family estate sat on a quiet street in the older part of the city's north side. A stately 2-story brick house behind a row of mature trees that shielded it from the road without announcing that they were shielding anything. The lawn was neat. The exterior was simple. There was no gate, no fountain, no dramatic entrance. Diana had called it a family house the first time she saw it. Comfortable, she'd said. Old-fashioned. She had never once asked why the property taxes were what they were, or who handled the upkeep, or whose name was on the deed. She had walked through its rooms with the mild appreciation of someone passing through a museum exhibit that wasn't quite to her taste, And then she had gone back to talking about countertop finishes and her colleagues' renovations. Adrienne Cole had been coming to this house for over a decade. She arrived in a dark gray sedan, carrying a leather bag that was not large, but was clearly heavy with documents. She was a tall woman, composed, unhurried, with sharp eyes behind clean-framed glasses. She wore no jewelry except small gold earrings. She looked like what she was, a person who had spent 20 years becoming very good at something important, and who had nothing left to prove about it. Walter opened the door before she knocked. They sat in the study, his father's study, the same room where Walter had opened the drawer 2 nights ago. The mahogany desk, the bookshelves, the single window that let in a long, clean rectangle of morning light. Adrienne set 3 folders on the desk, opened the top one, and began. She laid it out with the efficiency of someone who had been running the numbers since the phone call. The Price Family Holdings Trust, she confirmed, had been established by Walter's father 28 years ago, predating Walter's marriage to Diana by 16 years. It was structured as a private irrevocable trust, a legal architecture specifically designed, in Adrienne's words, to exist entirely outside the reach of marital asset claims. Walter's name appeared in the trust as sole beneficiary and managing trustee, but the trust itself was its own legal entity. Diana's divorce filing, Adrienne said, named 2 assets: Walter's salary from his engineering firm and the equity in their shared marital home. That was all. Her attorney never looked further, Adrienne said. Because she never told him to, Walter said. Adrienne nodded once. She would have had to know there was something to look for. She closed the first folder. She didn't know, so he didn't look. The trust is completely untouched. Walter took that in. He set his hands flat on the desk. 2 things, he said. First, freeze every voluntary disclosure. Nothing beyond what's legally required in the filing. If her attorney doesn't know to ask for it, we don't offer it. Done, Adrienne said. She was already writing. Second, he paused. I want a quiet audit of Brendan Fields's development portfolio. Full picture. Projects, lenders, investors, outstanding obligations. Quiet. I don't want him knowing anyone is looking. Adrienne looked up from her notepad. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise, exactly. More like the recognition of a chess player who has just watched someone pick up a piece she hadn't expected them to touch. I can have preliminary findings by end of day, she said. Then let's get started, Walter said. The summary arrived at 6:18 that evening, attached to a secure message from Adrienne's office. Walter read it at his father's desk, in the same chair, in the same evening quiet. Brendan Fields's flagship downtown development, the glass and steel mixed-use tower he had been pitching to investors and featuring in every profile written about him in the last 2 years, was leveraged at nearly twice its actual appraised value. He had borrowed against projected returns that had not materialized. 3 private lenders were currently holding paper on the project. Walter read that line again. Then he kept reading. 2 of those 3 lenders, men whose names he recognized without effort, were investors in the Regional Development Fund, the same fund in which the Price Family Holdings Trust held a controlling position. Walter set the papers down on the desk. He looked at them for a moment. Don't make any calls yet, he said. The room was quiet. The evening light held. He picked up his thermos. The penthouse was on the 14th floor. Diana stood at the floor-to-ceiling window with a glass of red wine and looked out at the city below. The lights, the movement, the ordered grid of streets spreading outward in every direction. It was the kind of view that made you feel important, just for standing in front of it, like the city was presenting itself to you, like it had been waiting. She had unpacked her good jewelry that afternoon. She'd set it out on the vanity in the master bathroom, the marble one with the heated floors, and she had looked at it and felt, for the first time in a very long time, like everything was in its right place. She called Jerome at 8:15. He picked up on the third ring. "Hey," he said. His voice was the same as always, low, steady, a little careful. "I just wanted to call," Diana said. She moved away from the window and sat on the edge of the long white sectional. "Let you know I'm good. Better than good, actually." "Yeah?" Jerome said. "Jerome, you should see this place." She laughed, and it came out easy. "Light. The view alone. I mean, it's something else. We went to dinner last night at Rowan's. The actual Rowan's, not the one downtown. The original." Jerome said. She waited for more. It didn't come. "You're not going to say anything?" "I'm listening," he said. "You sound like you're at a funeral." "I'm not," he said. "I'm glad you're okay." "I'm more than okay." She leaned back against the cushions. "I feel like myself again. Like the version of me that got a little, I don't know, buried. The last few years." Jerome was quiet for a moment. Then, "Have you talked to Walter?" Diana exhaled. Briefly. "The attorneys are handling things. But you talked to him? After?" "He was fine, Jerome. That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I expected from him." She shook her head even though no one could see it. No argument, no big reaction. He just stood there, same as always. The man has no fire, no ambition. He never did. Jerome said, "He fixed that problem on the Delmore project before the city pulled the permit." "I remember you telling me about that." "That's engineering," Diana said. "That's not ambition. That's just competence. It's not the same thing." "I know the difference," Jerome said. Something in his voice made her sit up slightly. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer right away. She could hear him breathing, the way he did when he was choosing his words. It had always annoyed her, that pause. Jerome never said anything by accident. "Diana," he said, "did you know his family owns the Meridian Corridor?" She blinked. "The what?" "The Meridian Commercial Corridor, the stretch of properties running from Hargrove down through the old warehouse district." She shook her head slowly. "Jerome, what are you talking about?" "The Price family," he said. "Walter's family. They've held those properties for years. Commercial leases, warehouse space, the whole strip." He paused. "The administrative offices for your hospital system are in a building on that corridor, Diana." She felt something shift inside her chest. Very small, very quiet. "That's—" she started. "Jerome, where are you even getting this?" "I looked into it," he said. "After you called me last week. Something felt— I wanted to understand." Another pause. "I'm not being dramatic. I'm telling you what I found." "Walter is an engineer," she said. Her voice was steady. She made it steady. "He works for a firm. He drives a 7-year-old truck." "I know what he drives," Jerome said. "Then you understand why what you're saying sounds—" "Diana." His voice was quiet, not sharp, not heated, just quiet in the way that stopped her. "I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm asking you if you knew." The silence stretched out between them. Outside, the city lights glittered against the dark. 14 floors down, a car horn sounded and faded. "You're being dramatic," she said. Jerome didn't argue. That was the thing about Jerome. He never argued when he knew he was right. He just let the silence do the work. "I have to go," Diana said. "Okay," he said. "Call me if you need to talk." She hung up. She sat on the sectional for a while without moving. Then she got up, rinsed her wineglass, and went to bed. The sheets were expensive. The room was cool and quiet. The city hummed 14 floors below in that distant, unreachable way that should have felt luxurious. She stared at the ceiling. "Did you tell him about the properties?" Walter's voice. Flat, unhurried, with nothing underneath it she could read. The question he had asked, and then not explained. The question she had not thought about again until right now. "What properties?" she had said. And he hadn't answered. She turned onto her side. She closed her eyes. She tried to place the question in a context that made sense, some ordinary context, something small, something that explained why a man like Walter would have properties to mention at all. She couldn't find one. She lay still in the expensive dark and tried to remember if she had ever, even once, asked Walter what his father had left him. The answer settled into her chest, like something cold. She had not. Walter was on the site by 5:40. Same truck, same thermos, same worn boots on the same packed dirt. The sky was still dark at the edges when he pulled in, and the security light above the trailer door clicked on automatically as he stepped out. He stood there a moment, hands wrapped around the thermos, and looked at the skeleton of what was going up. Concrete and rebar. The bones of a thing. He nodded once to himself and went to work. By 7, 3 of his crew were on site, and the 4th was running late. Walter didn't comment on it. He was already crouched near the southeast corner of the foundation, flashlight in one hand, checking a section of rebar placement that had been bothering him since the previous week's pour. The spacing was off. Not dangerously, but enough. He marked it with a piece of orange chalk and left a note clipped to the foreman's clipboard before the foreman even arrived. That was the thing about Walter. He never waited for someone else to find the problem. The calls started that same afternoon. He made them from his truck during his lunch break. Engine off, windows down, thermos on the dash. 2 calls, both to men who had known his father for decades. Men who had sat at that mahogany desk in the family study, negotiated over coffee, and never once needed anything explained twice. The first was Harlan Osei, 71 years old, private equity, 3 commercial developments currently under management in the metro area. He answered on the second ring. "Walter Price," Harlan said. His voice was warm and wide, like a room you'd been in before. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." "I should have called sooner," Walter said. "You're calling now," Harlan said simply. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking the trust has been quiet long enough," Walter said. "I'm thinking it might be time to let people know who they're dealing with." A pause. Then Harlan made a low sound that wasn't quite a laugh but carried the same warmth. "Come see me Thursday," he said. "Bring Adrienne." The second call was to Marcus Webb, 63, real estate law, a man who had drafted 3 of the original trust documents alongside Walter's father. Marcus didn't say much on the phone. He listened, asked 2 questions, and then said, "I'll make sure the right people know you're moving." Walter thanked him and went back to work. Word moved the way it always moves in private circles, not loudly, not quickly, but with the particular weight that comes from the right mouths saying the right things to the right ears. By the end of the week, it was understood, in certain rooms, that the Price Trust was repositioning. No announcements, no press, just the quiet shift of attention that happens when serious money decides to stop standing still. The Commercial Development Summit was held on a Thursday in October. It was a big room, high ceilings, round tables, a stage at the far end with a podium and a panel setup already arranged. The kind of event where everyone was networking before they even sat down. Business cards moved like currency. Conversations happened in the doorways and the corners and on the way to the coffee station. Walter wore a dark jacket over a clean button-down. No tie. He carried a legal notepad and a pen and nothing else. He had barely cleared the registration table when the first handshake came. A city planning commissioner named Gerald Fitch, who clapped Walter on the shoulder like they'd seen each other recently, even though it had been almost 2 years. Then a woman named Sandra Park from the Regional Development Board, who smiled and said, "Tell me the trust is finally going to put something on the Hargrove end." Then Harlan, appearing from somewhere to the left, who introduced Walter to 2 men whose names Walter already knew from his father's files. None of these people were in Diana's world. None of them had ever come up at dinner. Walter moved through the room the way he moved through a job site. Unhurried, deliberate, present. 40 minutes in, A woman with the summit's organizing committee found him near the coffee and asked if he would be willing to join the afternoon panel on private land development in the urban core. "We had a cancellation," she said. "And honestly, with the trust's portfolio, you're exactly who that conversation needs." Walter looked at her. "What time?" 2:00, she said. "I'll be there," he said. It was just before the lunch break when a developer named Carl Reese pulled him aside. Carl was in his mid-50s, steady, the kind of man who didn't spend words carelessly. They found a quiet edge of the room near the far wall, away from the noise. "Something you should know," Carl said, keeping his voice low. "Brendan Fields. He's been pitching a development deal for about 18 months now. Different investors. Same pitch. Big mixed-use project. The whole thing is built around acquiring the warehouse district land." Walter kept his face even. "Price Trust land. Your land," Carl said. "He's been telling people he has a pathway to the owner. That it's basically done. Just a matter of timing." Carl's jaw tightened slightly. "I've heard it from 3 different people, Walt. He doesn't have a pathway. He's never spoken to you or Adrian a day in his life." Walter nodded slowly. "I appreciate you telling me." Carl studied him. "Thought you should know who's been using your name." They shook hands. Carl moved back into the room. Walter stood at the edge of the crowd for a moment. Around him, the room hummed with conversation and the clink of glasses and the performance of ambition. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He stepped out through the side door into the quiet of the hallway. Adrian picked up immediately. "It's time to introduce myself," Walter said. Walter called Diana's attorney at 8:15 the next morning. He was sitting in his truck outside the job site. Engine off. Thermos on the dash. The crew was already moving behind the chain-link fence, and he could hear the sound of equipment starting up, but he stayed where he was and made the call. The attorney's name was Preston Hale. He was polished and careful in the way that expensive family law attorneys tend to be. Every word measured before it left his mouth. He came on the line after half a minute. "Mr. Price," he said, "I wasn't expecting to hear from you directly." "I know," Walter said. "I'm calling to schedule the final settlement meeting. I'd like to do it at the house. This Saturday, if Diana is available." A pause. Papers shuffled somewhere on the other end. "I'll check with my client and confirm," Hale said. "Is there anything specific you'd like to address before we—" "I'd like 15 minutes alone with her before attorneys come in," Walter said. Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll pass that along." "Thank you," Walter said. He hung up and went to work. Diana agreed. Walter wasn't surprised. She would want to see the house one more time. She would want to see him. To confirm, maybe, that she had made the right call. People who need to believe they made the right call usually want one more look at what they're leaving. Saturday morning was gray and still. Walter pulled into the driveway at 9:50. He sat in the truck for a moment. He looked at the front door, the small maple in the yard that had grown a full foot since they planted it together. The garage, where his father's old drafting table was still stored in the back behind the lawn equipment. He picked up his thermos. He got out of the truck. Diana was standing in the living room when he walked in. She had her arms crossed, not defensively, more like she was holding something in place. She looked good. She had always looked good. That was never the problem. "Walter," she said. "Diana," he said. He didn't sit down. She didn't either. He set the thermos on the side table near the door, the same place he had set it every morning for 9 years, and he looked at her. "I'm going to tell you some things," he said. "Not to hurt you, because you made a major decision, and you deserve to understand what you actually decided." Something moved through her eyes. Not fear, exactly. Attention. He told her. He told her about the trust, its structure, its history, how his father had built it over 30 years. He told her about the commercial corridor, including the building where her hospital's administrative offices paid monthly rent to a property management company that reported to the Price Trust. He told her about the industrial warehouses, the development fund, the controlling position. He told her the valuation, the actual number, said plainly, without theater. He watched her face. First, she didn't believe it. Her expression was smooth and skeptical, the look of someone waiting for the catch. Then, the skepticism started to crack. He could see the math starting to move behind her eyes, the calculations, the comparisons, the 12 years of mornings in that house, the pieces rearranging themselves into a shape she hadn't seen before. Then, the calculations stopped, and what replaced them was something quieter and harder to watch. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. Her voice was different than it had been, smaller. "My father told me the right person wouldn't need to know," Walter said. "I believed that. Maybe I was wrong to. But Diana, I showed you who I was every single day. I showed up. I fixed what was broken. I sat at that table and listened to you talk about what you deserved and what you wished your life looked like." He paused. "I never hid who I was. You just decided that wasn't enough, before you ever thought to ask what else there might be." She uncrossed her arms. Her hands dropped to her sides. "Is there any way?" she started. He shook his head. "One small, clean movement. The papers are already signed," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. He met her eyes and held them. "I hope things get easier for you," he said. He meant it, not warmly, but truthfully. There was no anger left in him. He had put it down somewhere between his mother's kitchen and a Thursday morning summit, and he didn't need to pick it back up. He turned and opened the front door and called back toward the driveway where Adrian was waiting in her car. He left her everything she had asked for, every piece of furniture she had wanted, every account she had listed, every item on the settlement she had submitted through Preston Hale. He took his father's mahogany desk, the drafting table from the garage, a small framed photograph from the study wall, and his tools. That was all. He carried the last box out himself. He loaded it into the bed of the pickup. He got in, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway without looking back. He had one more meeting today. Brendan's building was 12 stories of glass and polished concrete in the middle of the downtown development corridor. The kind of building that was designed to make a statement before you even walked through the door. Walter had driven past it 100 times without stopping. He pulled into the parking structure. Adrienne was already there, waiting beside her car in a charcoal blazer, a leather portfolio under her arm, her expression the same as it always was, composed, focused, ready. "His partner's name is Marcus Webb," she said, as Walter stepped out of the truck. "He's been with Brendan's firm for 6 years, handles investor relations." "Good," Walter said. They walked to the elevator together. The conference room was on the 10th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a long table of pale birch wood, a mounted screen at the far end already glowing with the opening slide of a pitch deck, bold fonts, aerial photography, projected returns in clean columns. Brendan Fields was standing when they walked in. He was exactly what Walter expected. Tall, well-dressed. The kind of man whose handshake arrived before his words did, firm and practiced. "Walter," he said, smiling wide. He said the name like they were old friends. "Great to finally sit down. I've heard a lot of good things." "Mr. Fields," Walter said. He shook the hand. He didn't smile. Marcus Webb was at the far side of the table. Younger, cautious-looking, the kind of man who watched a room before he committed to anything. He nodded at Walter and glanced at Adrienne. "This is Adrienne Cole," Walter said. "She handles our legal and financial affairs." Brendan gestured toward the chairs on one side of the table. "Please, sit. Can we get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "No," Walter said. "Thank you." They sat. Brendan settled into his chair across the table, with the ease of a man who had done this 1,000 times, in 1,000 rooms, and believed each one was his to command. "So," Brendan said, glancing at the pitch deck on the screen, I put together some materials that I think will give you a real sense of what we're building here. The vision, the numbers, the trajectory. I think once you see the full picture— I don't need the deck, Walter said. Brendan paused. The smile stayed in place, but it tightened at the edges, the way a door does when the wood swells in summer. All right, he said slowly. What would you like to start with? Walter reached into the leather folio he had carried in and placed a document on the table. He slid it across the pale birch toward Brendan without hurry. It was the Price Trust's ownership records for the full warehouse district. Every parcel, every address, every square foot. Documented and clean. Brendan looked down at it. He picked it up. He read. Walter let him read. I understand, Walter said, that over the past 18 months, you've been pitching investors on a development deal, a flagship project, and that the pitch has described a pathway to this land. He let that sit for a moment. I'm that pathway. I'm here to close it. The smile was gone now. Brendan set the document down on the table. He looked at Walter, really looked at him, maybe for the first time since they'd sat down. Walter, I think there may be some— The Price Trust holds a controlling position in a regional development fund, Walter continued. He did not raise his voice. He did not lean forward. He sat exactly as he had been sitting. 2 of your current private lenders are investors in that fund. Our position gives us standing to ask questions about how collateralized loans are being used. He paused. Those questions have already been asked. The answers are uncomfortable for your current projects. Marcus Webb stopped moving on his side of the table. Brendan was very still. I am not here to threaten you, Walter said. I'm reporting facts. Facts that exist independent of this meeting and will continue to exist after it. He looked at the ownership records still lying on the table between them. The land is not for sale. It was not for sale 18 months ago when you started telling people you had a pathway to it. It is not for sale today, and it will not be for sale to you. The room was quiet enough that Walter could hear the ventilation system running behind the walls. He placed both hands flat on the table and looked at Brendan Fields directly. You told my wife she was making an upgrade, Walter said. I wanted to meet the man who believed that. He looked at him for one long moment, measured, unhurried, and entirely without cruelty. Now I have. Walter stood. He picked up his folio. He buttoned the middle button of his jacket. He walked to the door, Adrian beside him, and he did not look back. Behind them, the conference room held its silence. Then there was the sound of papers being gathered. Quick, quiet, certain. It was Marcus Webb. He had already started collecting his documents from the table before the door clicked shut. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday. Walter heard about it through Adrian, who heard about it through the kind of quiet professional network that never makes noise but always knows. One of Brendan's private lenders, a firm out of the financial district called Hargrove Capital, had formally withdrawn from his flagship downtown project. The stated reason was clean and bureaucratic. Unresolved collateral concerns pending further review. 5 words. The kind of 5 words that, in the development world, land like a demolition charge in a load-bearing wall. Walter read Adrian's message, set his phone face down on his desk, and went back to the structural drawings spread in front of him. He did not celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. This was simply physics. Things that were never solid eventually fall. The second lender followed 9 days later. This one didn't send a letter. They sent a representative, a young woman in a gray suit who arrived at Brendan's office, asked for 30 minutes, and left in 15. Word spread the same afternoon. In the development community, that kind of exit doesn't stay quiet. It travels through lunch tables and phone calls, and the pauses between sentences at industry happy hours. People who had been watching Brendan's flagship project with cautious optimism began watching it with something else entirely. Without the Price Trust's warehouse district as a foundation, Without those parcels, those addresses, those clean square feet that Brendan had been promising investors for 18 months, the pitch to the third investor simply had nothing left to stand on. There was no anchor. There was no pathway. There was only a projection on a screen and a man behind it whose numbers didn't hold up when someone finally looked at them closely. The third investor passed. They didn't even send a letter. Marcus Webb's public statement came out on a Thursday morning, posted to his firm's website in careful, neutral language. He was pursuing other opportunities. He wished Brendan's ventures well. He had made the decision some time ago and was grateful for the years of collaboration. It was 12 sentences. It said nothing directly. It communicated everything. By the following week, the penthouse was in the news, not the apartment itself, but a line item in a financial disclosure that a local business reporter had dug up. Mortgage, not a purchase, not an investment, a debt dressed in floor-to-ceiling windows and a downtown zip code. The charity gala sponsorship, the one Diana's co-workers had attended the previous year, the one that had been mentioned over dinner while Walter sat quietly and said nothing, was quietly pulled. The organization's communications director said only that sponsorship arrangements were reviewed annually. She said it pleasantly. She did not return further calls. The city's development community is a small world. It operates entirely on reputation, on who says yes to whom, on whose name makes a room lean forward, on whether the story a man tells about himself matches what his balance sheets say when examined by someone who knows how to read them. Reputations built on projection rather than substance don't just decline in that world, they correct, sharply, finally. Brendan Fields's correction had begun. Diana was still inside it when it started. She watched it the way you watch a ceiling crack spread from the corner of a room, slowly at first, then in a way that makes you understand it was always going to reach the center. She didn't say much about it. Not out loud. There wasn't anyone to say it to. The dinners had become quieter. The events had become fewer. Brendan was distracted in the way a man is distracted when he is managing problems he cannot talk about in front of the person he is trying to impress. She was sitting at the kitchen table in Brendan's penthouse, her kitchen table now, or what had felt like hers, when Jerome knocked. She hadn't called him. He had just come. He had a paper bag with 2 coffees from the place near his office. He set them on the table without making a production of it, and sat down across from her, the same way he had sat at kitchen tables with her their entire lives. Steady, present, not performing anything. They talked for a while about small things, their mother's garden, a show he'd been watching, a mutual friend's new baby, normal things. The kind of things that remind you the world is still turning, even when your portion of it has stopped feeling level. Then Jerome set his coffee down and looked at her. "You made this choice, Diana," he said, quietly. No edge to it, just the plain shape of the truth. Now you learn from it. She didn't argue. She had argued once, on the phone, weeks ago, and she didn't have it in her anymore. She looked at the table. "I have a name," he said. "A therapist. She's good. She doesn't let people off easy, which means she actually helps." He slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "Call her." Diana took the paper and held it in both hands. Jerome stayed for the rest of the hour. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't pretend the hole wasn't there. He just sat with her inside the wreckage of her own choosing, the way a good brother does, not because it was comfortable, but because she was still his sister, and she was still going to need to find her way to the other side of this. When he stood to leave, he hugged her. She held on for a second longer than she meant to. Jerome drove home through streets that were still lit up with the last of the evening. His hands were loose on the wheel. The radio was low. His chest felt heavy in the way it does when grief and love press against each other from the inside, and there is no clean way to tell them apart. He thought about the piece of paper Diana had held in both hands. He thought about the way her voice had sounded on the phone 9 days ago when she'd first called him. Not triumphant anymore. Not certain. Just tired. He hoped she would call the therapist. He believed she probably would. He turned onto his street. He pulled into his driveway and sat for a moment with the engine off, listening to the tick of the cooling metal in the quiet. He had told her the truth. That was all he could do. It was enough, and it was the only thing he had to offer her that would actually hold weight when everything else stopped looking solid. He got out of the car. He went inside. He left the grief at the door, not because it was gone, but because there was nothing left tonight that required him to carry it standing up. 6 months is enough time for the world to forget it was ever different. The site was 3 blocks wide. It sat in a part of the city that the development community had been calling underserved for 20 years while doing nothing about it. A polite word for ignored, for passed over, for left to manage its own slow erosion without intervention or investment. The buildings that remained standing on the surrounding blocks were tired, but not beaten. The people who lived and worked in them had the particular dignity of people who had never been given much, and had built something anyway. Walter had driven through this neighborhood for years. He knew the corner store on Delmar with the hand-painted sign. He knew the church on Fifth with the broken gutter that had been broken for a decade. He had looked at this part of the city the way his father had taught him to look. Not at what was missing, but at what the bones could hold. The bones here could hold a great deal. The Price Trust's first publicly announced urban project had broken ground 11 weeks ago. The permit was posted on the construction fence in a plastic sleeve, the way all permits are, bureaucratic and ordinary, flapping slightly in the wind. Walter Price. Principal developer, Price Family Holdings Trust. His name right there, in plain black print, available to anyone who walked by and cared to read it. He had not made a speech about it. He had not issued a press release. Adrienne had handled the planning commission filings, and someone at the commission had apparently mentioned it to someone at the business desk of the city paper, because a short item had appeared on a Wednesday morning. 12 sentences about the project, 4 sentences about the trust, 2 sentences about Walter. His phone had received 11 texts from people he hadn't heard from in years. He had responded to 3 of them. He was not new to this work. He was new to doing it under his own name, in plain sight, without the comfortable cover of anonymity his father had taught him to wear. It fit differently than he'd expected. Not worse, just different. Like stepping out of a building you've been inside so long that the outside air takes a moment to feel normal. He was on the site by 6:15. Same truck. Same thermos. The truck had 140,000 miles on it now, and the heater on the passenger side ran a little warm in the mornings, but it started every time and it got him where he was going. He had thought once or twice about replacing it. He hadn't. His crew arrived by 6:45. They moved the way a good crew moves, without being managed at every step, without needing the principal to stand over them. Walter walked the frame, checked 3 load points along the eastern wall, asked 2 questions, got 2 solid answers, and moved on. The framework was rising. You could see the shape of it now, the outline of what it would be. Commercial on the ground level, residential above, green space threaded through the interior. A project that would put something back into a part of the city that had given enough away. Ruth arrived at 10:30. She came in her own car, parked carefully on the street outside the fence, and walked through the site entrance with the unhurried deliberateness of a woman who has been patient her whole life and has no reason to rush now. She was wearing a dark coat and carrying nothing. She didn't need anything. She just walked to where Walter was standing and stood beside him. They looked at the framework together. The steel and lumber and concrete block rising up against a pale November sky. The crew moving through it with purpose and noise and the specific competence of people who know what they're building and why. Ruth was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your father would have been silent about this." Walter looked at the frame, at the eastern wall, which was going to be solid, at the foundation, which was already poured and set and permanent. "So will I," he said. Ruth nodded once. That was all. She didn't need to say anything more, and she didn't try to. His phone buzzed at 2:30. He was at the site table, a folding table near the foreman's trailer, covered in drawings and coffee rings, and a clipboard with inspection notes. He picked the phone up. He didn't recognize the number for a moment. Then he did. A single text. 5 words. "I hope you're well." He read it once. He set the phone face down on the table. He picked up his thermos and took a slow drink of coffee that had gone slightly cold in the November air. Then he capped the thermos, tucked it under his arm, and walked back out onto the site. He walked the length of it without hurrying, from the south end to the north end and back again, past the crew, past the rising frame, past the permit in its plastic sleeve on the fence, unhurried, precise. His boots on the packed ground, his eyes on the work, his name on every document that mattered, exactly where he belonged. Around him, his crew moved and called and built, raising something that would still be standing long after every version of this story had been told and forgotten and told again. Walter walked the line. He kept his eyes on the work. He did not look back. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.